Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crossroads Church podcast. My name is Grant, and today we have another episode of our Going Deeper series of podcasts, where it is our goal to provide you with content that is going to help you go deeper in your relationship with God. I'm so excited because today we have comedian Mike Goodwin on the show. Mike is absolutely hilarious comedian, speaker, and leader. Whether it's a comedy act for a church event or a keynote address at a conference, Mike uses his ability to merge leadership and laughter to help meet his goal of leaving places and people better than he found them. He's appeared on Lifetime, BET, Dry Bar Comedy, TBN, Daystar, USA The Word Network, and Circle TV, and been featured on SiriusXM and nationally syndicated radio shows. Mike has shared stages with Dr. David Jeremiah, Tim Hawkins, John Crist and Michael Jr., and participated in the USO Europe Comedy Tour. When not on stage, you can find him sharpening his skills as a writer for digital media outlets and platforms. He's been featured on America's Got Talent and currently has an Amazon Prime special called What You're Not Gonna Do Is Not Laugh at These Jokes. He is absolutely hilarious, and I am so excited for you to hear today's episode. So let's go now to my conversation with comedian Mike Goodwin. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us here today on this podcast, man. We're so excited for you to be here. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So first question I want to ask, you're not wearing it right now,
right?
But you always wear a bow tie
right
when you do your stand-up. So explain, what's the bow tie about? Explain that to us.
So the bow tie, basically, I started doing stand-up when I was 28. So I realized when I first started that there's a lot of comedians out there, and it's very easy to get lost in the bunch. So I was trying to figure out how could I stand out from the crowd? And so that's typically the way I dress. One thing I noticed about comedians when I started, they're not, as a group, really well dressed. So I knew that that kind of would give me an advantage if I just dressed the way that I typically dress. And that's kind of where the bow tie comedy came from.
Yeah, now you're like kind of known for it. It's like your
right,
thing.
Right. That's my brand.
Awesome, man. Well, that's cool. I mean, anything that you can do to set yourself apart, you know, make yourself stand out. Now we all know the guy with the bow tie.
Yeah, and what was wild about it, I had branded myself so well that people weren't even calling me Mike Goodwin. There were folks that would say, "Hey man, bow tie comedy is going to be here with us." And
nice.
Like, "Hey man, my name's Mike
It's
Goodwin."
not my name. It ain't bow tie.
So I needed to bring it back a little bit.
Awesome.
Because I had branded it too well.
So it says in your bio, you know, I was kind of reading your bio, just kind of prepping for our conversation. It says that you developed an affinity for comedy and used it as a way to cope through difficult situations that you faced as a child.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that. What were some of the things that you faced growing up, and how did comedy kind of help you through that?
Yeah, first, I think that in my house, I'm the oldest of three, and so I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. My parents were often arguing, and not just verbally, but physically having altercations. And so I can remember probably being maybe 6 or 7, that age where my parents would get into these arguments and I was helpless. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't physically stop one of my parents from, assaulting the other. So I would notice that after they would argue, my mother would come in the kitchen, prepare dinner, go on business as usual. But it would be so tense, and it would be such a uncomfortable setting and atmosphere. It didn't feel good. And I was just trying to figure out ways to lighten the mood. And I remember one day my mom was in the kitchen doing, preparing dinner and getting that ready. My dad typically, when they would argue, if he didn't leave the house, he would stay in the room, close the door. My mom would come in the kitchen, start preparing food. I'm the oldest of 3, so I have a brother and a sister that's younger. And my mom was in the kitchen, and I just remember doing something that made her laugh. And when she laughed, it's like the tension broke. And so that became my technique. So when they would get into arguments and would cool down, I would start doing my routine. I would start doing my show. And what would happen, if I knew I was doing well, like my brothers and sisters, my mom would be laughing. My dad would hear like the noise from the room. It was like, what's all that noise? You know, what's y'all doing out there? And so I was like, oh, I'm ripping tonight. So that was kind of the beginning of it.
Yeah.
And then in school, you had to figure out how to get bullies off you. You had to figure out how to avoid negative attention. And that was one of the things that I had to figure out how to do. On the bus, I would ride home on the bus, and I was, an underclassman, and we had all these older kids. And so what would happen, the kids would like pop you in the back of your head, crack jokes on you. And at some point, I just got to this place where I'm like, I'm not gonna like just submit to the onslaught of jokes and attacks. So I was like, hey man, I gotta take up for myself. I gotta do something. Yeah. Now I wasn't a big kid. I wasn't a big guy. I think at this point in life, people would be surprised. But I was a little dude. And so I had a smart mouth. I had a great sense of humor. So I created these ideas, these thoughts that, okay. And I knew the culprits. There's typically 2 or 3 main bosses on the bus. Most people piled on. But there was 2 or 3 folks that were orchestrating the whole movement. And so I figured out, okay, if I punched the biggest guy in the face verbally, I wasn't physically punching anybody. But if I attacked the biggest 2 guys, that would cause everybody else to leave me alone. It's like to see you watching a movie and somebody goes to jail and it's like, hey man, you got to go in there and you got to take the biggest guy out. Yeah. And so that's what I did. One day on the back of the bus, I get popped in the head, and then I just started roasting one of the older guys to the extent that he wanted to fight. I mean, that's a problematic. You want him to leave you alone. You don't want him to fight you. But after that day, I had very little issues with folks after that. So that comedy has been a friend to me when I've been in some very precarious situations.
Yeah. But it kind of taught you that in those moments of tension, there's something that you can do to kind of make it a little easier on people going through that.
Yeah, and then I think just personally, I find a lot of things funny. So life may be sucking around me, but I pretty much like, oh man, this is not that bad. Like I'm a former soldier. I've been to basic training. I've joined the fraternity. So I've been in very sucky scenarios. I've been in very sucky situations where in the midst of it, it's kind of funny to me. Like there's something that's happening in that moment that's like, oh, that's funny. Like that guy has a funny accent or
helps you kind of be optimistic.
Yeah, I just go somewhere mentally with comedy. Comedy has been kind of, folks talk about your superpower. I think just comedy has always long been a superpower for me, even when I didn't know my level of strength. Like I always knew it was there, but I didn't know how much of a benefit it would be for me.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were in the service.
Right.
So you never saw stand-up comedy as anything to be pursued.
Not even close. I'm from a small town, Camden, South Carolina. There's no comedy clubs there. There's no comedians outside of Mike Goodwin that come from my town. Yeah, I didn't even think I was stand-up comedian funny. Like as a kid, I said funny stuff. I did funny things. But to me, a stand-up comedian had to be able to command the room with stories and their conversation. I was a pretty boring kid. I had imagination, but I didn't have stories that I can just wow the audience with. And so as a child, I just was kind of the impromptu. I was more of the throw the rock, hide the hand kid. People always ask, like, was I the class clown? I wasn't a class clown. Or if I was, I wasn't in the top 10. Like I was low in the rankings. I probably didn't even make the rankings. I was always honorable mention. But I was the kid that would tell the class clown some ideas. I'm like, man, you think, I think it'd be hilarious if you were the moon in 9th grade. And be like, yeah, you're right. So I was that guy. I was kind of the puppet string, the writer, the guy in the corner watching all this stuff happen.
So what are some of the things that you you tried, and what are some of the things that you did, and what were you kind of searching for along the way?
That's an interesting question. I never felt like comedy was a real endeavor for me. So I just it never was like you hear someone that said, "Oh man, I knew when I was 7, I saw Eddie Murphy," and I was like, "I'm doing that."
Yeah, yeah.
That wasn't my story.
Never
so
crossed your mind.
never crossed my mind. So I just basically, and I was just telling my children this, I just always had an internal motivation to do great stuff. Like I just always wanted to be above average. So I joined the Army right after high school. Basically, I found myself in a position where I wasn't a great student academically. So when it was time for me to apply to college, I was only applied to one college, but we didn't have the money. I didn't get scholarships. I doubt that I would have, gotten significant amount of aid to be able to pay for it. Mm-hmm. So I said, I'm going to join the Army. I had been in ROTC as a young student, and I had a high regard for the military. So I said, man, I'll go into the military, do the GI Bill, and then I'll go to college. And so that was my plan. So I joined the military. I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which is field artillery. So it was all dudes. And I spent from August, maybe July, from July to December, because artillery didn't have a separate AIT. So you have your basic training, and then typically you'll go to AIT somewhere else. Mm-hmm. What we had was called OSIT. It was one site training. So you did AIT and your basic in the same location with the same drill sergeants for the most part. It was like we woke up one morning and the drill sergeants were like, "Welcome to AIT." It was like most folks, they graduate and they go to a whole different post. So we spent, I forgot how many weeks it was, but it was, at least 5-6 months just at the same location. So did that and then went to Korea for my first year. Then I went to Fort Stewart, Georgia. And so I did a 4-year enlistment. When I was in Fort Stewart, I figured out, okay, man, I got to figure out where I want to go to college. So I was looking at places back in South Carolina where I'm from. Ended up identifying Orlando University's small liberal arts school in Greenwood, South Carolina. Went there, and then I was on the track. Initially, I thought I was going to be in like physical therapy, personal training. But ultimately, I graduated with a bachelor's of science in political science. So my thought, at one point, I was going to become a lawyer. Then I was going to become a PhD in political science, a faculty member, and teach at the university. But I realized I just enjoyed being on college campuses. So like when I got to college, I just took the whole experience. Like I took it all in. I did everything. There was very little I didn't do. I was a resident assistant. I was a campus orientation leader. I did the summer program. I video recorded the basketball team. I just was Mr. on campus. And then one day I figured out, like, how can I spend the rest of my life on a college campus? And so I remember talking to our dean of students, like, how do you get your job? So he took me to this conference, and I found out about student affairs or student administration, that you could work on campuses and not be a teacher and be in the classroom. And so I went to graduate school at the University of South Carolina, got a master's in higher ed administration. And then that's where I found comedy. Like comedy kind of T-boned me as I was, because my goal would have been to be a high administrator in a college campus, a dean of students, VP of student affairs, possibly even a university president. That was kind of my trajectory. Yeah. And then I got sideswiped by comedy.
So how'd that happen?
So comedy happened at my church. There's a guy by the name of Akintunde. He's a comedian. He was a secular comic that had given his life to the Lord. And so he'd given his life to the Lord, joined our church, and then we began serving together in the media ministry. So we were in the media ministry, camera, mixer, the whole deal, working services. And so we're often on headsets. You're talking through the service. And so I'm running jokes kind of by him. Or not just jokes, just giving commentary. Like, look at that lady sleep. Just things that happen during the service that's not related to the sermon. Yeah. So we had too much fun on the headset because, pastor was like, "What are y'all doing?" People could hear us in the service, so we had to make sure
we used
certain
to get
people
in trouble for the same thing. We'd all be on camera, and they could hear us in the back laughing. They're like, "All right, guys, we
having a
stop."
great time,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so that's what you want for your volunteers.
Yeah,
but we
yeah.
were having too much of a great time because I guess it was conflicted with
Right.
the service, what we were there to serve. But I was throwing ideas, cracking jokes, and so my personality and sense of humor came forward. And basically what happened over, I guess, a period of time, he just finally looked at me and said, "Hey, man, this is some really good material that you've been sharing with me." And he said, "I can either go on stage and do this material that you've been talking about and get paid, and I'm not going to give you any money, or you can take this material and go on stage." So he let me open for him. And I think he gave me like this 30-day ultimatum. You got 30 days. It was like, I basically, I tell people I got deboed onto stage. But I did my first set at our church, which we did a New Year's Eve service. And I opened. I was a surprise guest. Nobody knew that I was going to be doing it. Akintunde was doing a set at our church that night, so I opened for him. I probably did 7 minutes of comedy, got a standing ovation. It was a surprise for my church. It was such like the movie type of set. Like if you wanted to have the Hollywood example of what your first set would look like. I did that. And then I began to bomb for the next 2 years. And so that's kind of, I found myself doing comedy.
Yeah, yeah. So what made you want to go on America's Got Talent?
Well, I don't know if I can, I've signed some, I've signed some NDAs and all type of, but let's say that I sent in some footage.
Okay.
After an inquiry. And it was a scenario where I sent in some footage and they cast it. They were like, "Hey, we think you'd be a perfect fit for the show."
So how was that experience?
It was wow.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I think that the 16 years or however long I had been doing comedy to that point had prepared me for that 2 minutes of comedy, because it's a 2-minute set that you're doing in front of the judges. And I think that all the experiences I've had comedically prepared me for that moment on stage. I was not prepared for all the other things that surrounded it in terms of the acting part of it. I've done some classes and do skits online, that type of thing. But just thinking about televisions and the demographic and how you be portrayed online. Like I just went into it like, "Hey man, I'm a funny comedian and maybe this is my opportunity to break into the big leagues."
Yeah.
And so there's so much else that's going on behind the scenes that, you're just not privy to those conversations.
Yeah.
So it was great from a perspective of I was able to get some more recognition. I hit folks' radar, and it was like, "Hey man, this is a really funny guy. I would love to know more about him." And what it does comedically or in entertainment, the way that people judge you is by your credits. Like, what have you done? What have you been on? And so there's no bigger credit in my mind than NBC. Like to be able to say that I was on a primetime slot on NBC, and I was featured for like 7 minutes in one of the episodes.
Yeah.
So even to not kind of go on to the live show to get that 7-minute feature was like, oh man, that's worth
For sure.
all of everything that I got from. It was well worth it at the end of the experience.
Yeah, so you said that the 16 years of comedy led up to that. So I must have skipped a whole big
there's a lot of
portion.
there's a lot of comedy between.
So you started doing comedy. You said you bombed for about 2 years.
Right.
So, but obviously you stuck with it. Tell
Right.
me kind of how you found that footing.
So I think the first thing I realized when I did it that night, I think back to the question that you asked earlier, I felt like there was a void that was filled. So I can remember when I wasn't a believer, I grew up in the church and then I went to the military. So I wasn't really in the faith or walking in my faith. But when I went to college, I rededicated. But before that moment, there was just emptiness, right? So I was trying to fill this God void with a bunch of other stuff. So I was trying it with parties and girl, whatever I was trying to fill that hole with. And what would happen would be, for a moment, it would be, it'd feel like, oh yeah, I'm good. And then it would come back bigger, like the hole was wider. It's like, oh, that's not good. And it didn't disappear until God filled the hole. And so comedy was similar, because before I started doing stand-up, I was like a little kid that if you go to a kid's house and they bring you a toy and you play with the toy and they find out like, oh, you like that toy? Wait till I bring these other toys. And so that's how I would do with comedy. Like I would make someone laugh, and then once they would laugh, I'm like, oh, you like to laugh, huh? So now I got my whole toy chest out. Yeah. And it just felt like it felt like, I don't know how many of the listeners are big comic book folks, but it felt like Venom. So I felt like comedy would take over, like it would control. And I had this urge to be funny. I have to let people know. But then once I got on stage, all of that subsided. It was like, oh, this was what I was supposed to be doing with this thing I had. I had it. I didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. And so I was maybe using it in very inappropriate times when this was the proper usage of it. Yeah. So it filled this kind of that like idea that I was destined for something great. I was going to do something great. Once I started doing comedy, I realized, oh, this is purpose. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Now I just need to figure out how to do it better. Like I always, and the other thing that happened to me, I started doing comedy with two other guys, sorta. So Akintunde, once he allowed me to open for him, they really kind of started managing me at a very, pretty quickly. And so I would get these birthday parties, because what would happen, basically, there were events that people were asking him to do that he wasn't going to do, or, maybe he had conflicts. So I would get some of those opportunities. Then he created a comedy. It was a talent show, a competition. Pretty much, and the idea was he was going to do this comedy competition, and then I was going to be one of the contestants in the competition. But by the time he actually created, let's say, I think we might have did it in April of that same year that I started, it would have looked like a conflict of interest had I been a competitor or participant in this comedy competition and won. So what he ended up doing was having me do sets during the tallying of the votes. I would MC things. I would kind of just be the host or fill in to keep the program moving. And one of the prizes for the winner and the first runner up was to get opportunities to work with him one-on-one. It might have been like a year going on the road with him, something like that. So basically what happened, the three of us, the two guys from the competition and myself, kind of became this cohort. But I didn't know, because they were connected because they did the competition. I wasn't in the competition. And there was even some conversation from the guy who won the competition and some of his friends and family members like, man, if you would have been in it, it would have been really tight. We don't know. It could have went any kind of either direction. So I was like, oh, okay. So the three of us started following along. Akintunde would take us to shows, and we would basically have an opportunity to do time. That's the hardest thing about becoming a comedian, is when you first start, you can't get on stage because you're not good. Right. And then if you do get on stage, you only get 5 minutes, you get 3 minutes. You're not getting this extended period of time. Yeah. And what we basically were given was a comedy apprenticeship. That's kind of what it felt like, because he took us on the road with him. He allowed us to open, and we were getting 10 minutes a night. So that's pretty unheard of, coming right out of the gate. So the three of us, that's 30 minutes of time that we would get on before his show. So even whatever we did before him, it didn't matter, because he was going to come back at the end and clean it all up, because he was the pro. So we're just up there messing around. But those other two guys out of the group, I and I don't know what they would say, but I would say they were two stronger comedians than me. I think that the first guy, he was the best of the three. He had a natural ability. He was one of those guys that when you see, you want to laugh. Like he just kind of puts you in the mind of like a Mike Epps. Like when you see Mike Epps, you kind of want to laugh.
Yeah.
You know, he's a silly guy. He's charismatic. That was the other guy. Right. So then that was the guy named Todd. Then Corey was a heavyset guy, and he had kind of the fat jokes and the food, and he had a great mannerism. He was likable, cuddly teddy bear kind of guy. So I felt that those two guys had really good stage presence, really good material that people enjoy. And then myself, I was a little bit of an anomaly because I had good material, but I was terrible on stage. Like my stage presentation was very robotic. It was very impersonal. I wasn't looking at I wasn't entertaining. Yeah. I had great things I was saying, but if you measured it by what I looked like, so my presentation, if my words are 10, my stage presence was probably a 5. So you average those out, I'm a 6.5. In general, I felt like my guy Todd was consistently a 9, 8, 9, consistently. Like on a bad night, he's an 8. On a great night, he's a 15. Like, so he was like above just naturally where we were. And then I just felt like Corey was a solid 7, 8. Like he just was not, no flaws, no fluff, just kind of pretty consistent. Me, I was up and down. So I was, one night I might be an 8, one night I might be a 4. So I just was very sporadic in terms of my performances. But the thing that was the most infuriating to me was I was the funniest in the car on the way to the show. Right. I was murdering in the car. Like it wasn't even close. It wasn't close in the car. Like I was Mike Tyson in the car, but I can't take a car on stage. Yeah. Because I've been riding around with my buddies my entire life cracking jokes. So that felt comfortable. That felt very natural to me. Standing on stage with a microphone, talking to an audience was not natural. Right. So that's kind of where I found myself trying to figure that part of it out. And I just, and it was a spiritual, maturity for me too, because I realized that for a big part of what I was doing, it was more selfish than it was for the audience. So I had a big pride. I had a lot of ego. And I remember, going out on these shows and just not doing well. And I remember asking God, like, God, I mean, I enjoy doing this. I want to do this, but something like, what's not connecting? He was like, you're not talking to the people. You're up there for Mike Goodwin. And so once I started making that adjustment, it really started to take off a little bit.
So what was that? You said you found purpose, but you said at first, it was kind of for the selfish motives. What was that heart shift, and what is that thing that now it's like, that's why I do it, because of X,
I did it initially because I was enamored with me. Like I thought I was important. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be significant. This is it's similar to a child that's always kind of doing antics. It's like, hey man, I want some attention. Like, so comedy at that level was me saying, hey guys, look at me. Like, I'm funny. I'm likable. I'm a cool guy. When personally, maybe my personality, because I do have this personality prior to comedy, where if you didn't know me, you would have one particular opinion of me. But if you knew me, you'd be like, oh man, that guy's funny. That guy's a good guy. But if you just saw me, you'd be like, man, that guy thinks he's, hot stuff. He's very intimidated. He doesn't seem like he's no nonsense. I kind of have this duality of sorts before the kind of the comedian part showed up. So I always felt a little misunderstood through probably like my mid-20s, because I just felt like if you just looked at my face or you kind of knew me from afar, you don't know who I am. Like you have a thought of who I am. But if you really knew me, Like you would be like, oh no, man, this is the kindest, most benevolent, generous individual. So I had like a PR problem. I had a PR issue. And then that showed up on stage because I was up there. I wasn't talking to the audience. I wasn't looking at people. I was looking over their heads. I was up there because I felt like this was what made me feel significant. So when I had that heart shift, I actually, to the day, my wife will text me before I go on stage. She'll say, have fun and bless the people. And so that's the shift became, hey, man, I need to bless these people and I need to have a good time doing it. And so that's, before I wasn't doing that. I might have had a good time. Some people may have been blessed. That wasn't why I was there.
Right.
That was something that happened when I was on stage. But now I'm intentional. I'm coming to bless your audience and I want to have a good time.
Yeah, I feel like there's probably a lot of, not only comedians, but entertainers, but especially comedians that probably do go into it for that reason. Because, you get up there, people are laughing at what you're saying. Like, that's got to give you a high, like a rush of like, wow, like they like me. They think I'm funny.
Right.
You know what
I mean, that's why you see a lot of comedians get in trouble in their personal life because they now are getting attention from what they do comedically on stage that they've wanted their entire life. Like these guys wanted women to say something to them or people to take them to the party or to the game. So now when I do this particular thing, I get that attention, but now I'm in a place where I got to keep doing this thing. So now I'm doing comedy for you and I'm not doing it for me.
Right.
And I'm not doing it for him. I'm not doing it for a productive purpose. I'm doing it for a destructive purpose.
Right.
And that, I mean, you can do that in singing. I mean, you can find that in a number of things where preaching, I think that's another example where you are moved by the response of the people versus, no, man, I'm an instrument. I'm here to conduct something to you that he's given me that's not mine.
Yeah.
I'm just what you see. And if I have a great perspective of like, I'm an under shepherd to the shepherd, you don't get off. Like, at this, I'm 46. So I'm not, somebody comes to me after the show and like, oh, you the greatest since Eddie Murphy. No, I'm not. Like, I'm funny. I work hard.
Yeah.
I do a good job, but I'm not the second coming. And what's really good, because we just set up my table. Well, we didn't set up my table, but one of the best things for me that I still am able to exercise humility is taking down my table. So at the end of the night, I do a set. People have a good time. Some people come buy shirts. Some people don't. But at the end of the night, I'm folding T-shirts and putting them back in a suitcase.
Yeah.
I'm putting my banner back inside. So Kevin Hart's not putting T-shirts in a bag. Kevin Hart's not putting banners back in sleeves. So there's a level of, hey, man, it was a great night. People were blessed. But let's keep it in perspective. Right? We're still working on something. We haven't got, and then maybe when I get to the point I have some merch person, there's still some other thing I need to do to remind myself that, hey man, let's keep this in perspective. Yeah,
I love that perspective because I think we see it now maybe more than ever, but because of social media,
right?
So you mentioned preaching, like I mean, we see the age of celebrity pastors.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, it's great because they can make such an impact, but there are some people, and we've seen it time and time again, that get into it for the wrong reasons. Right. And you've got that high of people saying amen, people clapping, people standing and saying, oh my God, what a great revelation. But I love that perspective that you said about, I'm here to bless you. I'm not here to get something. I'm here to give something.
Right.
And so what is that as a comedian? What is that thing that you feel like, how can people be blessed by coming to a comedy show?
Yeah, that's a great, and I wanted to make the point too, what you were talking about, celebrity preaching. It's celebrity culture because there are authors and podcasters and comedians. So there's a culture in Christianity where there's celebrity. And so you have to be mindful of like putting boundaries around yourself and even acknowledging that, hey, okay, people are going to respond to me differently than they used to because I was on television or, they saw me on this thing and my videos on YouTube and people are seeing it regularly. to the point you're asking, I think that first things that people should do, should not, I don't like to should people. So the first thing that's helpful in a comedy show is comics aren't pastors or lecturers. Like there's this, I listen to, I'm a fan. Like I'm like the hair club for men type guy with comedy. Like I'm not only a comedian, I'm a fan. I enjoy it. So I listen to podcasts and I watch interviews and I just nerd out on comedy. But there's something about the state that we're in where political correctness and we don't want to offend people and folks are saying like, oh, it's got to be so difficult to do stand up. No, it's not. Like just say stuff that makes people laugh. And it's very clear this stuff makes people get in trouble. Stay away from this stuff. And if you say this stuff, just understand that there's backlash that is accompanied with it. Like I don't think that there's an easier time to do comedy because the lines are very clear. Yeah. Like these are the things that get people in trouble.
Right.
Before you didn't know, like it was a little bit more loose. Mm-hmm. And so now that it's more defined, you're like, yo, okay, yeah, you say something about that popular, yeah, you're gonna get in trouble. Or you're gonna have to talk about it, you're gonna have to deal with it. So I think for folks to just come to a comedy show with the expectation to it's entertainment. I just there's somewhere along the way that people look at comedians as truth tellers and these philosophers, you got these comedians that have these shows where they talk about policy and they talk about current events and there's some comedians that are very dynamic in terms of how they communicate what's happening in society and all of those things, but that's not every comedian. Like everybody's different. Everybody has a different way to present the art form. So I would think to enjoy comedy, listen to the people that you enjoy, and then the people that you don't enjoy, don't listen to them. Like don't tune in. You don't have to fight against them. I always find it interesting. Like I write jokes where my goal and my intent is when I write a joke, I want to write a joke where the majority of the people in the room laughs. I try to write my jokes where 100% of the room will laugh. I don't care what political side of the stand you're on. I want it to be so funny that the humor overruns your belief. So if you believe this particular thing, I want my joke to be so much funnier than that. You're like, oh, that's a funny joke. Like I might not agree or I disagree. That's funny. So I try to write where I don't alienate. I don't try to put people. I don't come for people in my comedy. So that's how I approach it. But then even in that, there's still times where people get hurt. People still get offended. I think personally, you don't have to be offended. Like offenses are things that we choose to carry. Like don't carry it. I always say that in comedy, your vote is laugh. If you don't find it funny, don't laugh. Like you don't have to email. You don't have to go and pull me to the side. You don't have to, and especially if it's not something malicious. Like I had this one time, this woman, I did a show, and I got a bit where I talk about like yoga pants and women's behinds, the backsides. And this lady came up to me and was like, you can't talk about women's heinies. Yeah, I was like, first off, they're not heinies. The butts or backsides, rumps. There's other words we could use. And I was like, why? And she didn't have an answer. Yeah. She just was like, you can't. And like, hey, man, if it wasn't funny, don't laugh. Right. Like, it's okay to be teased. It's not okay to be bullied. Like, those are two different things. I could tease my friend, man. You got a big head. Ha ha. And we keep it moving. But every day I'm talking about your head or I'm talking about your shoes. I'm talking about now we're bullying you. Now you're a target. Yeah. But if I'm like, hey man, you almost tripped and fell. Ha ha. You're like, hey man, why you almost tripped and fell? Like, that's an ugly shirt. Like, it's true. Don't wear that shirt out again. Like, so I think to breathe, I think people come to be offended not only for themselves, but on behalf of others. Like, let people be offended for themselves. There's been so many times where folks come and talk to me on behalf of another group, and the group like, we good. But like, no, I know that group is upset, but no, they good. I talk to them like we talk all the time. I know the group.
Right.
I think that's the first thing. But comedy has been it's such a loaded word. It's like it's so subjective. Everybody's an expert of their own sense of humor. So if someone says that Carrot Top is the most hilarious person they've ever seen, you can't refute that. That's who that's who the person is.
Yeah.
And if I tell you I think Kevin Hart's hilarious, you're like, I hate Kevin Hart. He's so dirty, his language. And so I just think people make comedians these lecturers or these intellectual. Hey man, don't come get political advice from Mike Goodwin. Don't come to Mike Goodwin. Now I can give you advice on how to have a great marriage, raise it, but don't come to get that stuff. Like get that as a secondary part. Come for some laughs and the entertainment. Now if you hang out and you be like, oh man, this is a solid guy. He's had some life experience. He's done some things. He's an entrepreneur. Okay, he's been very successful. But somebody just asked me recently about Morgan Freeman. I think he said something. I need to go do some research myself. But I guess he said, if we keep talking about racism, that keeps racism happening. I'm like, why are we listening to Morgan Freeman on issues of race? Like, he's an actor.
Yeah.
There's nothing I can think of like, oh yeah, man, Morgan Freeman told me how to be a better dad, man. I was reading Morgan Freeman's book, and my jump shot is better because Morgan Freeman has this master class.
Yeah.
No, man. Now, if you're talking about acting, and again, I know people are multifaceted, but come to be entertained. Come to enjoy the show. And I think, the joy of the Lord is your strength. I think it's such an indictment on Christians that can't laugh. I think that it says more about them than they realize.
And I think now, maybe more than ever, I felt like comedy is very important because of what you're saying exactly. Because we live in such an age of being offended, such an age of looking for an offense in every single thing. And there's something so special about going to a comedy show and a comedian making fun of you or your culture or whatever and just being like, you're right. Like we do that. And that's hilarious. Like, and it kind of teaches you to just be like, man, just take a deep breath. There's so much actual serious things going on in the world that if I can just laugh at this thing and not get offended, like let's all just we're all humans. We're all people. Let's be real. Right. Let's just laugh. Let's just laugh at ourselves. Yeah. You know what I mean?
There's a whole war happening right now.
Right.
But you're going to be upset at me because I said something about yoga pants. It's like, what's going on right now? And I think the other point is societally, people are actively divisive. Like, it's one thing to have a disagreement and something we're not on the same page, but I feel like there are no discussions and there is no dialogue. It's just bullet points, talking points, and people yelling at each other. And at a comedy show, I'm not yelling at the audience. Like, I'm sharing an insight and things that I've crafted. Like, I'm more like a chef than anything. I'm prepared this meal, and I want you to enjoy it. Like, I don't want you to say, man, this is some hard steak. Like, I had to chew this steak. Like, I want you to, oh, man, the ribs were good and the noodles were good. Yeah. Oh, my goodness, the Brussels sprouts, they were tremendous. Like, I think if folks looked at comedians like, hey, man, I'm preparing something for you to enjoy as opposed to I'm coming to, because there is something about comedy, like, if you show me that I'm trolling you bothers you, I'm gonna keep trolling you. Like, I'm gonna keep
funny.
saying the thing that keeps
because that's the point.
That's what we're doing here.
Point. That's why we're making that joke.
So if I see that bothers you, I'm gonna keep. But if you just laugh and we keep it moving, it's like, okay. And then I'll make this point. We'll get into something else. The issues that people have with jokes, they never the jokes that people not laughing at. No one ever comes. It was like, hey, man, that joke you did when it was dead silent, you should not do that joke anymore. I already know that.
Yeah.
I know, I'm not. So comedy is very self-correcting. Like, you shouldn't be upset with me. Be upset with the majority of the room that laughed at the joke. Like, that, I said the thing that they laughed at. That's not something I just said this that we all like, yeah, that's funny. We all agree. So you want to come and tell me the thing that's the most funny is the thing I shouldn't say? I'm like, come on, man, stop.
Yeah. I've always, and I know you've worked with John Crist before in the past. I've always loved him because of the fact that he just like comes at Christians and like just makes light and makes fun of so many things that we do. And I'm just like, you're right. That is weird. You know what I mean? Like, and I always felt like Christians need comedians like that because I feel like what we're talking about now has been such a problem specifically with Christians.
Right.
Because, and I think it comes from a good place. We're all trying to live up to the Bible. We're all trying to live lives that are above reproach. But in the process of that, we've kind of put ourselves to this level where we can't laugh and we get offended at everything and we get mad at people who don't live the way that we live. Right. And there's something to be said about comedians like yourself that are just be like, hey, let's just take a deep breath.
Right.
Let's realize that there are some things we do that are funny, that are weird, And
it's a difference between mocking the church than observing the church.
Right.
Like, I'm a part of the faith. I'm a part of the church. So I'm not coming to attack the church. I'm just like, hey man, I'm married to my wife. So what I say on stage, I'm not attacking my wife. These are things that, and I've had jokes. I've said things to my wife like, hey, I don't like the way you say that. Could you, change it? And I got to change it because we're in relationship. And so I can't just be like, no, man, that's the funniest joke, man. What are you talking about? Like, I got to figure out a way to do it. So yeah, the church for so long hasn't been able to just honestly evaluate itself and laugh and say, hey, man, that does come off a little weird. Like, yeah, man, let's say we ought all pray a hedge of protection around you at the football game. And you're like, wait a minute, man, what's a hedge of protection? Like, I don't go to church. What is that?
Yeah.
What is that you talking about? What kind of hedge? So, yeah, just having folks that could put a mirror up to the church, I think is important.
Absolutely. And, going back to blessing people that come in, I feel like comedy really is such a blessing. I mean, if you got a bad day, go on YouTube, type in your favorite comedian and just laugh.
Right.
And something about that, it just changes the whole mood.
Yeah, you can't be angry when you're laughing. There's no way.
It's impossible.
to be depressed and angry. This just happened to me. So I was on tour with Annie F. Down, who's a podcaster, and we were in Denver. And I'll do the meet and greet at the merch table. And this woman came up. She was, in tears, but she was kind of in an upbeat kind of spirit. And she said her father had died 2 years ago. And it's been so hard. But she said in my show, she felt like something broke, like the grief and like all the struggle. Like she laughed herself to a place where it's like, I feel so much better. Like whatever you did, whatever you said. People say it all the time. They're like, man, I haven't laughed like that. My face hurts. And, I haven't laughed that hard in years. And there's something cathartic. There's something healing. There's something therapeutic about just being able to put your guard down and laugh. That's why people enjoy being with their friends. That's why they enjoy going out with particular couples. It's like, man, we just had a good time. We laughed. We just enjoyed each other's company.
Right.
And so to be able to go to an event or a show and to see somebody that is skilled, like somebody just said, hey, man, I'm really going to take this thing that God given me and cultivate it and grow it and improve upon it. That's why I think that this is not the question you asked, but there's a issue I have sometimes with other quote unquote Christian comedians. I think that when you put Christian in front of things, sometimes it can feel like an inferior product. So if you say Christian rap, Christian comedy, people are like, oh yeah, that's just the little romper room. Those for the kiddies.
Yeah.
And I feel like as a performer, as a comedian, when y'all bring me into your church, you don't bring me in for me to share my testimony. You bring me in to be hilarious. Mm-hmm. And what happens sometimes with folks in our genre, if you're not going well, you won't share your testimony. It's like, hey man, we don't need your testimony, bro. We need some better jokes.
We're trying to laugh.
We need some jokes. We brought you here to share your. And so what I would encourage, if especially young comics or even older comics, if you are a faith, you're a believer, and you don't be afraid to go to places that aren't churches to sharpen your skill. I make everybody laugh. Like that you can't put me in a scenario where I'm not funny. And again, there's opportunities where that be an open mic. And I know people have different challenges. So there's folks like, I can't go to the club because I used to be partying. If I go to the club, do jokes, I'll be back on the dance floor. I get it. Like if it's gonna cause you to stumble in your walk. But I think the most valuable thing, and it's not even just for comedians, put yourself in a position where you struggle, where you have to stretch. And that's, I know personally, where I've grown the most comedically is when I've been in places where I felt very uncomfortable. And I figured out how to make myself comfortable.
That's real good. Man, I bet stories like the one that you shared with that lady that came up to you after the show, I bet you found that gratification of knowing that you helped her in her situation, I would just imagine that surpasses any high that you got when you first started, when it was all about, yourself.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right. It's very humbling too. Like, it's wowing. Like it's like, wow. Because you don't know that this person's about to say, like, you just shaking hands. People like, oh, I used to live in South Carolina too. And you're like, yeah, what part? And so you're doing that. And, oh, my dad saw you on Drive On Comedy. You're like, yeah. And then it's like, hey, my dad died 2 years ago. Like, whoa, it's just not in the script. Like, so it's very jarring, right? So it jars you. But when you just see people sincere, and it's happened multiple times, people say it often, you are doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing. It reaffirms what I do. Somebody just asked me about, am I happy? I found this to be an interesting question. Am I happy with the comedy, doing this? And I said, I don't know. I don't know if I'm happy. I enjoy what I do. And I know if I wasn't doing this full time and I was working at the school or I was doing something, I still would be trying to get on stage. Like, comedy would still be such a big part of what I was trying to accomplish in my life. So I think that the fact that I can focus a lot of my energy and attention on this particular thing, I think it's beyond like happy. It's just like, man, I'm just right on target to what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, you're doing what God's called you to do.
Right.
That's what he made you. So what would you say to people, and we can kind of wrap up with this question, if there's somebody listening to this, they're going through a tough season, like you've been through tough seasons in your life, and you found, comedy, you found humor to help you through that. What would you say to somebody that you could take from your experiences, from your life, that could help them through whatever they're going through?
So if they're believers and they're Christians and they have Christ, I think one of the most important things for me, I think that everyone has comedic lighter fluid. So there's going to be people in your life that laugh a little harder at the jokes. Y'all have a little bit more fun together. Make sure you check in with those people regularly, because those people encourage you and you don't even know it. Like, there's just certain friends of mine that we get on the phone. I mean, it's not even 5 minutes and we're laughing about something. It's not a struggle. It's not a difficult scenario. Make the relationships that you have with people easy relationships. Everything shouldn't be a battle and, I don't want to hear this today. Oh, man, do I got enough time to sit on the phone? No, you got to have some people that like lighter fluid, man. They just, if you in a good mood, and they just make you more excited, more happy, more jubilant. I think that, and you can curate that, not just with people. Like, you can watch, if there's a movie, a particular scene, like, you can have that scene. I'm sure you go to YouTube and watch. There's a scene like from White Chicks where Terry Crews is singing this song, and I can't not see that and not almost start crying laughing. I mean, it just, so that I have a lot of those. I have a lot of go-tos that I just, whether they're songs that will improve my mood. One thing I did too, I did this, it's been a few years ago. I wasn't feeling good about myself. I was sitting around down on my, oh, this stuff ain't going as fast, or I'm not as where I'm supposed to be, whatever. And I took my phone and I started texting encouragement to other people. Like I was just like, hey, bro, man, you're a solid father. Thanks to have you as a friend. And I did that to like maybe 5-6 people. I started to feel better. Then they started texting back. And then I started to feel even better. Like, so, man, if you're in a tight spot, figure out a way to get out of it. Like, and there is a way. There's a way that you can easily manipulate the scenario where you can call a friend and y'all can just relax and have some, just cut up. I think what happens too much as adults, we forget how to play. Like as kids, I got a 6th grader, my 11-year-old son. This dude has no issues with playing. Like he can play. He can sit in the middle of the room, in the middle of the floor with toys, with stuffed animals, and play a whole NBA Finals. Like and I remember being that kid, and I when I see him doing that, I feel like I hurt a little bit because I'm like, man, there's gonna be a day where you're not gonna want to play with them toys no more, like that. And I long for those days of like, man, when life was so simple, I could just go in a room and just fight with my toys.
Right.
And so I think that if you're in a tight spot, renew your desire to play. You gotta figure out how to play again, whatever that is for you.
I love that. So be intentional about putting yourself around the right people, around putting yourself in environments or watching content that will encourage you, make you smile, encourage other people, right. And then remember how to play. I think that's some wise words.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Hey, man. Well, hey, before we leave, anything, what you got going on? Anything you need to tell us about?
I have Amazon special, Amazon Prime special. It's called What You're Not Gonna Do Is Not Laugh at These Jokes. So if y'all would go on and just rate it 5 stars, you ain't gotta watch it. You just gotta you just go
just go rate it.
Just rate it. You ain't gotta watch it. It's funny. All right, take my word for it. But if I would love for people to go and see that and check it out, share it, let people know about it, and just follow me on social media. I'm at comedian Mike Goodwin on Facebook and Bowtie Comedy on Instagram and Twitter.
All right, man. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Going Deeper series of podcasts. I hope it encouraged you. I hope it made you laugh. I hope it helped you in your relationship with God in some type of way. Stay tuned to the Crossroads Church podcast for weekly sermons as well as bonus content just like this that we pray is going to help you go deeper in your relationship with God. Go ahead and subscribe. Go ahead and follow our feed so that you can stay up to date on all of the content. And I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. We'll see you next time.